The first modern clinical trial is believed to be a study in 1747, which researched potential remedies for scurvy. The trial famously hailed citrus fruits as a beneficial treatment, while simultaneously laying the foundation for one of the most important safety measures in drug development. Since then, this practice has continued to evolve as the scientific community thinks of the most effective and ethical ways to conduct research.
It seems that we are certainly making great progress with clinical trials, and the data would say that there are more people living with cancer than dying from it. And that's not because most Americans are starting to eat their vegetables. In fact, I think it's directly resulted in landmark clinical trials that has changed the face of breast cancer, that have changed the face of lung cancer and others.
That's Dr. Robert A. Wynn, director of Virginia Commonwealth University Massey Cancer Center and president of the Association of American Cancer Institutes. He believes that for many people, especially his cancer patients, clinical trials are more than an experiment. They're a light of hope for those who've reached the end of what standard care can do for them.
Hope that actually, if we can't find out or treat their cancer, there'll be hope for tomorrow that we'll be able to treat the cancers like pancreas and brain cancer. But hope for you today. Many of the people who are now living and not just surviving, but thriving cancers were on those early clinical trials for women with breast cancers. They're living 15, 18 years out today, running half marathons. Those early clinical trials, when we didn't know what was going to work and what didn't work, actually are allowing people with lung cancer to not just have access to a single drug, but to multiple drugs now that have been life-changing. And again, not having lung cancer patients just, quote, survive for a year or two, but thrive.
Clinical trials are a pivotal part of both discovering new treatments and weeding out the ones that are ineffective and potentially harmful. However, this promise of hope doesn't extend to all patients. Historically, there's been a distinct lack of diversity of trial participants. A 2020 report from the FDA shows that a majority of research participants are white. And as we learned in a recent Radio Health Journal segment, a person's ancestry can greatly affect how their body reacts to certain drugs. Without proper representation of demographics like age, race, and gender, clinical trials are only finding the safe and effective drug for one population.
The FDA has pointed out some of what we've talked about, that 80% of the people in the United States on clinical trials come from a homogenous background. They're predominantly white men. We've also noted that globally that this is actually also true.
In an effort to correct this oversight, earlier this year, Congress amended the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to require that certain clinical studies submit a diversity action plan to the FDA. According to the FDA's draft guidance, the plan should include enrollment goals of race, sex, ethnicity, and age that are dependent on the real-world population living with the specific condition. And though the FDA is a leader in the space, it's important to note that all different branches of research can have an influence. In fact, in 2020, the Bristol-Myers Squibb Foundation established the Robert A. Wynn Diversity in Clinical Trials Award Program. Wynn says that his program works hand in hand with the new diversity guidelines.
So keeping in touch with the diversity ideology of getting the benefit of the science to all people, the FDA and this program are intimately sort of aligned on that same topic. I think that to address the FDA issue of having then to increase diversity in trials, we did not have a program prior to this one that was really focused in the comprehensiveness of it on addressing the issue that was brought up by the FDA. So we feel incredibly proud that we were some of the early adopters, and before it got cool and before people started thinking about it, we really were super excited about doing this.
The Wynn Awards take select researchers through a 2-year program of training and research support. There's a separate option for medical students to spend 6 weeks in an immersive experience conducting community-based clinical research. The teaching part of this program is such an important step because many people assume that how one human reacts to a product will automatically translate to how all humans react. However, we know that qualities such as ethnicity, age, and gender all factor into drug response.
And in fact, there's data and there's a history about this where because we don't have representation of, for example, women in trials, we come up with a trial and we have the medicines. And it turns out that when we give the medicines, it works mostly for men, but sometimes it doesn't work for women. Can you imagine living with that?
A famous example of this is Ambien, a popular drug for insomnia. In 1992, the FDA realized that there was a 45% difference in absorption rates between men and women. However, they didn't think there was clear enough evidence to change the dosing based on sex. When it was released to the public, there was a rise in car accidents as many female consumers fell asleep behind the wheel.
You know why that was? It's because we were giving the wrong dose to women. Now, that's a little fun one, but can you imagine things like as we are creating cancer drugs, that we are giving a dose to men that is actually potentially harming women? This is why clinical trials are actually important, because it's not just that you have a 70-year-old white male that gets this therapy and now we have 100% of them on trials, and now we take that information and say, oh, it'll apply to women, it'll apply to blacks, it'll apply to Latinos. It may not. That's why having a diverse group of patients on the clinical trials helps.
And though we tend to think of diversity as just skin color, Wynn points out that it extends into other areas, such as a participant's location.
Even when we talk about white males, we're not always talking about white males that live in rural areas or areas where they're having tough time, where businesses are not, and the businesses have moved out of there. We're not talking about, frequently we're talking about access to clinical trials to people that live in urban underserved areas that are actually struggling. And so it boggles my mind why we as a society would allow these scientific breakthroughs to only be available to people who can actually afford them in big cities. The reality is the more representation we have, the more people we have from rural communities, the more women we have, the more people from Latino and African-American backgrounds, so just more people we have, the more we can literally more precisely tailor the impact miracle drug to you.
Wynn believes that finding a breakthrough treatment is only the first step. In order to truly have an impact, the researchers need to bring it into the community, building trust and increasing access. Bridging this gap between science and local communities is a main focus of the Wynn Awards.
The interesting thing about that is that they're also getting, for the first time, developing skill sets in how to outreach to communities in an effective manner. How to talk, how to communicate, how to connect, how to engage. And as a result of their being able to engage, they're being able to use the tools from community-based participatory research, they're now bringing the skill set and the confidence of how to reach communities and connecting that to their science.
Which Wynn believes will only help improve research outcomes and the patient experience.
While the science is good, it's even better when the fruits of the science can be accessed by all people. And so the most surprising thing is to not only to me, but I think to the trainees that participate in this program, is that the getting the science part is hard. But what was actually more interesting and surprising to them is that there was a science to getting it to communities like rural communities or poorer communities or communities of color. It was actually literally, I think, a mind-blowing, sort of experience for many of the trainees who were part of this program that says, wait a minute, there is a science to getting things, of communicating to people.
You can find more information about Dr. Robert A. Wynn and the Wynn Awards on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. For more behind the scenes, follow Radio Health Journal on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Our writer-producer is Kristen Farah. Our production manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Greg Johnson.